Hello, BADM 3020 classmates and Dr. Windsor. My name is Nick Smith, and my video presentation will go over the economic theory of distributism, which we discussed briefly in class. This theory is really unique, and in my opinion, really intriguing. So I think there's a lot of takeaways that can be found in its proponents. While it is a bit idealistic and also fairly impractical given our current geopolitical landscape, there's some really captivating ideas that might serve the United States as we move into a new decade. So, to kick it off, I'll start by discussing my personal experiences and background and how it influences my current values and also led me to look into distributism. I grew up in a pretty Catholic household, and my parents had me attend Catholic schools up through high school. That being said, my family was fairly conservative, but also pretty liberally minded. Like a lot of people I met, they considered themselves economically conservative, but socially liberal. My parents never forced a political ideology on me, and never talked much about politics or economics with me. I've never considered myself a political person, and have never really identified as something besides independent. Nor do I really do that right now, though I'm definitely more liberal leaning. Despite the conservative roots of my background, my political perspective has really opened up in my later years of high school and especially in college. The entire experience of befriending people in college allowed a lot of wildly different political viewpoints to come into my life, and it was very interesting to see how they either conflicted or conceded. A lot of these conflicts arose from the argument between conservative minds, who are pro-capitalism, and liberal minds who tout ideas that could be somewhat socialistic. Throughout this experience, I developed a small semblance of political ideals, such as a decentralized government, anti-monopolistic measures, and more accessible assets for medical care and insurance. So, when I began to look at different economic theories to dive into, that's why distributism really jumped out and intrigued me. So, what is distributism? As described by Dr. Windsor, distributism can be defined as an attempt to build a non-exploitative system of economics that provides equal opportunity of achievement to all members of society. Now, that should sound pretty neat to everyone, and it's an inherently intriguing concept, so I decided to dive into it more and see how it could apply to our current economic standing in America. Distributism was created between the late 1800s and early 1900s and was based upon the teachings of Pope Leo XIII and Pope Pius XI, and other principles of Catholic social teaching. Now, I don't really consider myself a religious person, but it's clear that I'm from a really Catholic background. So it's kind of interesting for me to see how a pretty strong connection here is apparent between the church and the state. One of the teachings of Pope Leo XIII that had the greatest effect on this theory is that the, quote, misery and wretchedness pressing so unjustly on the majority of the working class, unquote, was an unjust crime. Now this sentiment has become the heart of distributism. Ultimately, distributists believe that property, in this case meaning both personal and in terms of capital, is a fundamental human right that should be widely owned among people of different classes, as well as including assets of production. Now, G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc, the main leaders of distributism in the 1900s, branched off of this basic idea by prioritizing widespread private ownership of housing and industry, along with owner-operated small businesses and worker-controlled cooperatives. One of the most prominent aspects Belloc and Chesterton incorporated into this was the respect and privilege that working people deserved, especially those of lower economic standing. Distributism is a system in which safe working conditions are to be demanded, along with proper wages and the unforsakable right to unionize. In fact, here's Bernie Sanders to explain the troubled history of unions in America.
What is unique about the United States that has prevented it from having a real labor party?
That's a great question. And I think I could tell you in some respects, way back when, in the 1920s or earlier than that, where there really was a strong coming together of workers. The government came down really very hard on the Socialist Party of the time. During the 50s, you had attacks against the labor movement, through McCarthyism. So I think in this country there has been a real hostility for the working people to get together, to stand together, to create a government that works for everybody. And that's just the reality of where we're at.
And I think that many people in my generation, many young people, don't quite understand how unions work, or they don't feel identified by the labor movement. How would you make a union sexy again for young people?
That's a great question. Look, the answer is pretty simple. What a union is an understanding that when people come together, they have more power. That if you are dealing with your employer and you're getting low wages, and you go up to your boss and say, hey, can you give me some more money? The guy says, hey, you know what, I got 10 other people who want your job. But if you walk in with a union and you sit down and you have collective bargaining and you have the power to strike, for example, then your owners have got to listen to you. They have to listen to your demands.
Distributists even go so far as to advocate for a step above unions, which are guilds, in which people of different classes cooperate for mutual benefit, whereas unions are simply just one class. Through these concepts, distributism provides what seems to be a middle ground between socialism and capitalism, mainly upon the tenets of a decentralized government and economy. When the proponents I have mentioned are put into the context of the modern American economy, distributism and its ideals seem eerily prescient. Over the past few years, our society has grown increasingly aware of the large amount of disparity in America in terms of wealth, and more measures have been proposed to counteract this growing rift. Especially now, as the American economy sits in limbo due to the ravaging fiscal effects of COVID-19, certain pieces of the distributist ideology are really beginning to make some sense. During these months of quarantine, we have witnessed the power and prominence of the essential workers, including, but not limited to, grocery store attendants, medical workers, and agriculture industry workers. Without these valued people, our society would undoubtedly buckle and cripple. But yet, we are still seeing very few measures to improve the wages of these workers or provide them with proper safety precautions. In fact, many factories and supply centers have had many cases of these workers getting sick, largely due to the inability of their companies to give them proper safety measures. Seeing the center of distributism is treating the worker, such as the essentials, with respect and care, as well as allowing for their natural progression into a liberal safety, we could definitely use a little distributism right now. Moreover, if we could spread out the responsibility to supply, create, and disperse much needed goods like virus testing, protective clothing, and yes, of course, toilet paper, instead of concentrating the suppliers, we could more alleviate the demands of goods. Ultimately, I don't think distributism is very practical, let alone very doable in our current socioeconomic state. But the important values it brings up, such as protecting the worker and spreading out responsibilities, should serve as a really good reminder to who we need to assist and promote in America today. Thank you.